Daily TV with Dr. Susan Tata. The Africa we want: unity, consciousness, our culture, our spirituality, our history. One Africa for Africans worldwide. Motherland's calling its diaspora home. Join my voice. Join my team. Join my campaign. Campaign 21 hashtag 1 million subscribers on the Pan-African Daily TV YouTube. Be a volunteer. Apply now. Be the new Africa.
So, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good night, wherever you're watching from the continent, mainland, or in the diaspora. We want to welcome you on this very special Sunday special edition with our two main architects. We're talking about the biggest voices on the continent and in the diaspora. First of all, I would like to thank particularly King Maponga Joshua and also Professor James Small, who has been very precise and consistent on the freedom of the African. They have never wavered, they have never shivered, they have never changed seat, they have been coherent, they have been precise, they have been regular, they have been steadfast since from birth. So I want to absolutely thank them, and the African continent and people worldwide are actually thanking you for this initiative and this power steps that you are taking. You are the real hope of the Africa. You're the hope of the youth. You're the hope of the young people. You're the hope of a united Africa agenda. You are the hope of the African Union. You are the hope of Africans worldwide. Be them in the diaspora, be them on the mainland continent. They are looking up to you. And today they are very grateful to have you as guest on this special Sunday, where we just want to look at certain things around us. But of course, the main important thing is like uniting us, the continent and the mainland, speaking on one voice and one direction. So I want to thank all of you that are joining in. And as you can see, just for the purpose of information, it's very unfortunate that the followers on the Farmers of Thought on King Maponga's page will not be able to watch this show live because of obvious reasons. He's been constantly banned out of his page for a couple of months now. Yeah. So, but you can follow us on the Pan-African Daily TV Facebook page or on YouTube page or on our other platforms where everyone is watching. Now, I know that we have some very top dignitaries that are watching this program because of the people that are sitting here today, because of Professor James Small and the diaspora, and because of King Maponga Joshua Marara III, who is also now an honorary doctorate, who just had his doctorate. He's going to be sharing all this with us. Yes. But of course, there's a lot that we have to share on this special edition. So I'll just go back to the studio. And while you are warming your seat, take your pen and paper. As you know, on the Pan-African Daily, you have to take note. Yes, it is an institute of studies where our great leaders and advocates and teachers and mentors and professors give us exactly what we need to know about Africa, what we need to hear, and this we can trust and share. We can make a lot of noise about it. The information is accurate. It's coming from an African for the sake of Africans' unity. Thank you so very much for being here. Welcome, Professor James Moore. Welcome, King Maponga Joshua. Welcome.
Thank you. And I'm honored to be with my king today. I've watched you, so now I'm in the same space with you.
Thank you kindly. We bumped on each other a few days ago on the other platform. I was actually in a noisy place launching a book, but I appreciate your contribution. I have followed some of your hard work that you are doing in the diaspora, and it's an honor. It's an honor to be here with you today and sharing some notes. And I smuggled your number to my phone, so now I have your details. Someone else gave them to me. I will never get in touch. Yeah.
That is so beautiful. Please. Please, what a beautiful thing. So how do you know yourself?
I just want to say I am so sorry that Nana Kwesi is not ascending to the chairmanship of the African Union, because we prayed for years that he would become the chair, you know. So that would have been such a new direction, because I know that man from Ghana. He's a special spirit. So, Nana, I know you're hearing us, and we're honored for the work that you've done, but I still would like to see you as the chair of the African Union.
But there is hope. Why do we think so? I mean, we know that the Secretary General, or the chair of the secretary that is there right now, that position is for 4 years. So wouldn't be a step forward now that we're touching on this topic, that he would be, you know, the aspirant after the 3 years now, as a matter of fact? What do you think about that?
Well, one of the things, you know, we know why the OAU was founded. The first stage was to eradicate colonialism, definitely to unite Africans and to protect the integrity of each state, to protect the integrity of the people, to work with the UN and the Human Rights Commission. Some of those things have never worked for us, but I think we need a leader in the African Union that have a Pan-African consciousness, that have a Pan-African understanding. We have as many people almost living off of the continent as we have living on the continent. An enormous body of resources and revenue that the African Union just have not been able to pull together. That seems not to be an agenda. But Pan-Africanism is a part of the salvation of the African world.
Correct.
And hopefully the African Union will understand and see that, you know, that you have to have a leadership that is a committed Pan-Africanist, you know.
Okay. Absolute. If you go to the African Union's homepage, it is clearly stated there that the African Union is a continental union consisting of 55 member states located on the continent of Africa. Its founder is Mohammed Al-Gaddafi, late, headquarters Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and founded on the July 9, 2002 in Durban, South Africa. Now, we know that the new leadership was elected on the 6th of February 2021. He is His Excellency Felix Antoine, the President of Democratic Republic of Congo, I think. And then, but the mission and vision is clearly stated on, it is an integrated prosperity and peaceful Africa driven by its own citizen and representing a dynamic force in the global arena. Now, I want to go back to the studio to King Maponga. Now, the question of the day is, why is the African Union silent? When we talk about silent, we're talking about strategic happenings on the continent for its diaspora, on mainland continent. But we have never seen a union or a body that is represented, that comes out to make even an official statement. Are we doing something wrong? Do we understand actually the structure? Should we go to the member state or the African Union? It's just a secretary office where you come in and then you ask information of direction. So how is it that it can be so silent? King Maponga.
Firstly, thank you for that brilliant question. The question you're asking is not the what we are doing. The question is not the who must be doing it. But I think you're asking a very scientific question, which asks the how we must do it. The scientific formula that we need to formulate to implement a vigorous, I almost wanted to say a vigorous and violent African transformative strategy. A beautiful strategy that is on a shelf in an A4 bound page sitting on the shelves of Africa Union will achieve nothing. But a weak strategy implemented violently will succeed. I think what we lack, number one, is what I might call the lack of the political will of our leadership. At the beginning of the Africa Union, you know very well the war that was taking place, or the misunderstanding that took place between Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere. One group was saying, let's implement this immediately. The other group says, let's do it step by step. Let's take our time as we are making transitions. It's 60 years later. Unfortunately, those who wanted a gradual, steady implementation, they won the votes for the day. And for the past 60 years, we have been tiptoeing around the same idea. Before we could even conclude the step by step, the Julius Nyerere and the Kenyattas were actually propagating for a Swahili language base to unite the African in terms of language, not to undermine other languages, but to give us a common voice so that we could speak to each other as Africans across the whole terrain. And in the midst of our slumber, the Anglo-Saxons dug their feet in, the Francophones dug their feet in, the Luxembourgs dug their feet in, and the divisions of the Congo Treaty, which you call the Benin Conference, has not seen one brick removed from those walls. The states and countries that were slaves of the French, to date, they're still slaves of the French, with small little droppings here and there of funding. Same thing to the Anglo-Saxons under the Commonwealth, which I've come to term common poverty, where constantly again, the small little droppings of donor funding, presidents and leaders are given an agenda. We know that economics sponsors pays for politics. Politics is prostitution. It is not a legitimate concept of transformation. How are we going to do this? It takes a simple step. The issue that Dr. Small is raising, Professor Small is raising, of a concrete financial strategy, is not only a simple idea, but it's so profound. If you should look even adjusted cocoa for coffee, if all the African countries that are producing coffee and cocoa can come together to create a common basket so that all countries around the world who want to buy cocoa, they buy it from one African platform. That actually speaks of the stock exchange. We are able then to sell our coffee at a legitimate price as Africans. What we lack right now, less than politics, we lack what I might want to call initially an economic hub. I know we have COMESA, I know we have SADC region, but even in their conversation, they are not talking unity. Each organization is strengthening itself. We need the gold of Africa to be sold from a common platform. We need the platinum to be sold from a common platform. The coltrane from the common platform. The coal from the common platform. Then says the estate of Africa as a reserve and reservoir of material, until all that material is found in a common basket to benefit not the politician or the multinational companies, but the local African people. We will constantly be doing politicking rather than beginning to implement our own strategies. It is a shame of many of the minerals that are being sought for on the continent and beyond. Africa is supplying, if not less than 60, in some certain cases 80, in some certain instances 90% of all those raw materials that the international community is consuming. It's a very important question to ask: who is benefiting from this financial bribery, robbery, and thuggery that is happening on the African continent? So yes, on top of the program, I would want to highlight a critical factor that our economies as independent, small little states can never be sufficient to fight the African Union strategy. We need to consolidate the Ghanaian economy, Nigerian economy, the southern economies of Zimbabwe, Botswana, and South Africa, create for ourselves an African stock exchange through which what they have stolen, they have stolen. We still have enough on the ground to sponsor our agenda. The question is, how are we going to have one currency on the continent? Immediately you put one currency on the continent, you'll understand how Muammar Gaddafi was butchered because of that idea. And once Africa has one currency, it therefore speaks of a common trading zone where goods can move across the entire continent. And a grandmother selling groundnuts in Cameroon can trade her groundnuts with an old lady who is selling rapoko in Mozambique, who wants to buy something from Botswana and Congo, cassava, pounded yam in Nigeria. We lack a common financial market. And you know very well our African concept of a crore, where the cattle of the family, where the wealth of the family is put together. Until we have one crore from where our wealth is being distributed from, we are constantly going to remain as victims of multinational companies who come into our small little states with no intentions of building our economies, but harvesting our resources for a minimal price. I thank you. You are muted. You are muted, madam.
Oh, I'm so sorry. We, most of the time,
fine.
Thank you. Most of the time, we are thinking that the African Union represents a body and a voice of the continent. But if we look at this structure, like I said, it is a continental union consisting of 55 member states. And so it is so impossible that we can look up to a union that is representing 55. So it's like a secretariat that is doing business, negotiating with partners and coordinating the 55 member states. Professor James Small, is that correct to say so?
I think so. I think King Maponga just laid it out. I mean, because the concept initially was to come up with a united African state on all levels. And it doesn't appear that that's where the African Union is going. They seem to be satisfied with managing neo-colonialism. As I hate to be disrespectful, but that's what I see, managing neo-colonialism. The situation in Goma right now in the Congo, they've committed, I think, 2.5 million. And before that, when it first happened, they committed about 196,000 pounds to the Red Cross in Congo. And they're leaving the leadership to the UN, to Britain, and to other foreign countries. The African Union should take the leadership in the Congo.
Correct.
For resolving this crisis. Not be, they're operating like they're the 56th state. Okay? They're not operating like they're the embodiment of the 55 states. And so we are still sitting in the thrones of colonialism. The contracts that the colonial masters made with themselves and forced on us after the Berlin Conference is still in full effect. We sit in the richest real estate in the world, and we have impoverished people. Makes no sense. We give them $500 billion in natural resources. They give us $10 million and said they've given us aid. Who's aided who? So we have to be very clear and simple about it. Is the African Union's purpose to create the united solidarity economically and politically that King Maponga was just mentioning? It makes no sense that Ghana would be competing with Cote d'Ivoire around cocoa production. And it makes less sense when France and Britain and Holland is setting the price of cocoa when they don't produce one bush. We should be setting the price of cocoa to the world. Manganese, gold, tungsten, coltan, cobalt, all of what the Western world needs, they're telling us what our products should cost. And then they said, you can mine it. Just listen to this stupidity. You can dig your oil well. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, we will get you the money, the loan, to do this. But we will hold your profits and determine how it's used in your country. We will set the percentage relationship between you and the exploiting technocrats from the West who's running the oil rig. So Ghana can have oil that should have bailed us out of all of our crises. But what are we getting? 15%, 10% of our oil? How can we get out of any crisis? So the whole concept of an African Union that is not based foundation around the unity of economics, politics, and culture. The African Union should be leading a continental cultural movement for our people. As the King just said, we should have a single language. How could we argue against, say, for instance, Swahili, the most widely spoken language on the continent, when we're using French and English as our universal language? That's ridiculous. If we have to have a universal language, then let it be an African language, especially one that is largely spoken. You do not abandon your indigenous language. You didn't abandon your indigenous language for French. You did not abandon it for English. So why can't we have an African language as the communication vehicle for the entire continent, especially around the issues of trade and around the discussions of renegotiating, because this is what has to happen. When Mr. Trump, for whatever he was worth, came into the presidency in the United States, the first thing he did was dissolve the NAFTA contract. He didn't ask the UN. He didn't ask the European Union. He didn't even ask the American people. He said this contract is inappropriate for the profits of the United States, and he dissolved them, and the world accepted it. And he renegotiated a new contract with Mexico and Canada. Why is the African Union allowing us to remain in the contracts that was imposed upon us during colonialism? And when someone like the late, great President Mugabe tried to abrogate them, they sit by and allow and participated in sanctions against a man who was making revolutionary moves to get control of the resources of his country for his people. And we are still doing this. If the Americans say we sanction this person, no proof, no reason, as if they could be allowed to have one, we go along with that sanction. The African Union, they may make some statements, but you did not demand of your member states that we vote to say we will not support any sanctions against any African nation by any colonial imperialist nation under any circumstances, period. Make that declaration and end this mess. You've got a situation in the Congo where this Jewish businessman, Gertl, Trump came in and lifted the sanctions against him. Now, I heard that Biden last week restored those sanctions. But why do we have to wait for Biden to put a sanction on an imperialist marauder like this Jewish businessman that's caused the death of hundreds of thousands of Congolese people? Why haven't the African Union arrested him and sent him before the World Court or before our World Court, our African Court, for crimes against humanity? So either the African Union is going to operate as a real union or drop the title and say you're just a social and negotiating instrument for colonial continuation. I know that's harsh, but that's the truth. That's the fundamental reality of the function. Yes, they've sent the money to Congo, but we should do more than that. Why have we not informed the African Union, the diaspora, in the most vociferous way for aid? We throw away billions of dollars every week. No one has appealed to us. We have to find through the news what's going on in the Congo. Why have we not appealed to the entire continent for volunteers to go to Congo and serve under the banner of the African Union, not the United Nations?
Correct.
So the thing is it an African Union, or does it just have a title of being an African Union? Union presupposes there's a unity among the members' bodies that create a oneness around self-interest. And I don't see that.
Thank you very much, Prof. It's exactly what we look at it, because probably we are doing something and expecting something else, but maybe the structures in place actually do not reflect the vision of a united or a common agenda for Africa. Now, I'm going back to King Maponga. You talked already about the economy, which is one of the strategic tools that should constitute a union, an African Union body, as a unilateral state of its people and its diaspora. The next thing is communication. Now, we look at the issue or this instance of the Germans trying to negotiate settlements or compensation for Namibia. We had that topic yesterday, and I'm just seeing on the news that Namibia is refusing that compensation. Now, should it be Namibia to go and negotiate, or it is the place of the African Union to champion that negotiation in every terms?
Firstly, on the question of compensation, reparation, redistribution of wealth, including repatriation for those who want to come back to mainland, it's actually not a one subject issue that we are discussing, because by simply compensating, the question is, you are basing your figures on what? You kill 15 to 25 million people in Congo, if you are Belgium, for example, and then you walk up and say you want to compensate. It's you who wants to compensate. The question is, what is it that you want to compensate? And who determines the value of what you want to compensate? You want to compensate for the people that you killed. Can you compensate for the materials that you stole? Can you compensate for the artifacts that you took away? Can you compensate for the orphans that you created? Can you compensate for the displacements that you did? And I think if African Union had a sense of being, we needed a 3 to 4 point plan strategy of key critical issues. And I think one of the top ones would actually include not only the Congo massacre or the Namibian massacre, or right now I was reading the other day, the Queen of Britain has also agreed to return the 18 beheaded kings of Zimbabwe back to Zimbabwe. Now, it's nice to fly an aeroplane full of skeletons. The question is, what is the value of those skeletons? What is the value of the kingdoms that you destroyed? What is the value of the deprivation that you caused the nation? So if Africa could, this is where I wish some of our educated young people, particularly those in diaspora who may have skills of quantification and mathematics and economics, to consolidate a bill, to consolidate a destructive bill of the result and consequences of colonialism as a total, so that we can walk up to The Hague, to the ICC international courts, and submit that document as a whole. We can appoint a man amongst us who can walk up to the United Nations on one of the presentations, and representing all Africa, we can say for the past 400 years, the amount of damage that has been caused is equivalent to X. You'll be shocked that some of these countries that are harassing us now with sanctions, they actually owe us more money than the donor money they've contributed. And there's nothing called donor money. That is change money. If you look at the amount of money being taken out of Africa, vis-a-vis the amount of money they're bringing back as loans and donor funding, it's an insult to intelligence. It's an insult to the nation as a whole. We cannot even be sitting here talking of Germany wants to compensate. Of course, if we were the Jews like they did for the Holocaust, every Jew would have been up in arms and called the German government to book. Now, can we, these as Africans, really become Christians who love the Israelite and Abrahamic faiths for the compensation of 2 million Jews during the Holocaust, and yet the same democratic, the same Western world cannot recognize the 25 millions in Congo, another 15, 20 million on the slave trade markets of America? For a rough figure, just for a start, we could say between 50 and 100 million people were displaced, were murdered, were enslaved, and were disenfranchised. Are you telling me that you cannot come up with a figure of how much the colonial system has cost? And we're not asking for this money again, lest it comes and it falls in the hands of the colonial, neo-colonialist politicians who will take the money again and move it back to the same banks in the West. The question is, even if the money could be contributed, in whose hands is that money coming in? We therefore needed an African budget in the hands of responsible citizens who could fairly distribute that kind of a funding across the whole African terrain. I would look, for example, at picking up those billions that are collected. Number one, build up one African army, national army for Africa that protects all our borders, that speaks of security. Take some of that money, build an African university that looks at indigenous knowledge, that speaks of pharmaceuticals and etc. Take some of that money, build gold refineries so that we no longer have to be taking gold ore out of the country and it must be refined in other countries. We can begin to refine our gold. We can begin to refine our platinum and manganese, coal and all other minerals that we have, tin and everything else. So that money needs to be put in strategic countries like Cochrane, for example. We can actually, with that money, begin to produce motherboards and cell phones and then sell finished products to the Chinese and the Americans for their Apple and Samsung phones. It's not about just grabbing stones out of the ground and then shipping them up for processing in another country. So it needs intelligent leadership where these monies collected are not collected into the hands of the greedy politicians, but rather we consolidate that budget into a developmental budget. I'm even looking at Ethiopia and Sudan and Egypt right now fighting over the rights of water of the Great Nile River. There's no need for fighting. We need a consolidated strategy that says this river is supplying food to the entire northern part. Which sort of agricultural projects can we strategically position around the Nile River so that we can supply food to the top Sahara, Middle Sahara? So instead of countries now sharpening their guns to fight each other over the blockages of a dam, it speaks of nations, each one of them wanting the water for themselves. But if those three countries can sit down together and say, how much of this water are we going to need for consuming and drinking? How much of this water is for agriculture? How much of this water is for hydropower and etc.? We strategically position. Uganda, you do the agriculture. Ethiopia, you do the hydropower. Egypt, you do etc. Then it becomes strategic. But as long as we play national politics, we will find that we are divided by the very resources, which must be blessings. It's unfortunate that our blessings have become our curses.
Professor James Small.
When I listen to King Maponga, he sounds like the encyclopedia of the ancestors.
Correct.
Telling us to wake up. You see? Everything he said, I could echo those things. Because this is a question of freedom or no freedom. Are we going to be free or are we going to remain slaves? We can call it colonialism or neo-colonialism. It's slavery. Where every month we hear about the death in the Mediterranean of our young people leaving home to go to Europe, who barely have jobs for themselves, to look for jobs, because we who hold all the wealth can offer them none. And as my brother just laid out, if we're going to talk about moving forward, then you have to talk about the industrialization of Africa.
Correct.
From an African perspective. And that means every raw material we have should go through the first 2 to 3 phases, if not the entire phasing of development before it leaves the country. I remember Ghana had a company, it's called Balco. And Ghana has an enormous amount of bauxite. Until very recently, they didn't mind when Balco was a private enterprise. They did not mine the Ghana bauxite, which would have given enormous amount of wealth to Ghana. They were bringing in bauxite, which has a 6-stage development process, in the 3rd stage pellet form, with the industrialization being in other countries. And so we got the bauxite in either the 3rd or 4th stage in Ghana. Mm-hmm. Had they mined Ghana bauxite and have those 6 stages in Ghana, they would be looking for people from abroad to fill the work quotas. But instead, we end up looking for jobs. And that's true in almost any nation we have. The contracts that we have with the multinational corporations, which is protected, and those contracts are negotiated and the politics are manipulated by their national government for their corporate interests. The AU should be doing that for the 55 nation states, as was outlined by King Maponga. There's no way else we're going to survive this thing if we're going to remain under the divisions and the criteria of the Berlin Conference, because that's exactly where we are today. The Berlin Conference, people need to study it, see what happened there, see why they divided up Africa, how they did it. If you study it well, you realize that the First World War was fought in Africa. Every European nation, 14 nations, including the United States, who financed much of what they were doing, invaded every corner of Africa, north, east, south, and west, militarily murdering millions of our people. They don't even call it a war. Even when they end up with what they called their First World War, it was fought because Germany felt we ended up with lands where we didn't have enough wealth to make a difference. So either you make up that wealth or we'll take it from Europe. And you find that the Second World War was fought over the wealth of Africa also. Study the history. It will amaze you the lies that is taught as history. First World War in Europe, Second World War in Europe was fought over the division of the resources of Africa. The war that should be called the First World War, the invasions that was planned in Berlin in 1884-5, killed more people than any of the other 2 wars, and it's not even called a war. It chopped our nations up into little squares that they would exploit for the raw material to build Europe. Everything we now see in Europe came to Europe as a result of the decisions made at the Berlin Conference and the invasion that followed, where we were made criminals for defending our own land. You take Bombata in the Zulu nation and you put him in prison for defending his own land. You murder countless other kings in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in Congo, for defending their own land. And we accept that. We accept that interpretation of reality as though it makes sense. And then we form our consciousness on how we make decisions in the world today based on this lie and misrepresentation of history that is taught in all of our schools to our children even today. So the African Union have to rethink its mission. Otherwise, it doesn't have a mission. To give a few dollars when something occurs here or there, that's not a mission. You know, your mission is clear by your name, African Union. The name should define your intention. And your intention should be followed by your behavior and your actions. That's not what's happening now. What's happening now in the African Union, people get elected to office in the same way they do in many African nations, depending on which Western political structure has strategized and manipulate who should be in the leadership. It's just another political body that looks like it should be something, but we cannot wait another 50 years or 100 years for this thing to happen. China is there trying to gobble us up, and we fall in love with Asian soup, as though African soup have no flavor. The French president went to Rwanda the other day, apologizing for their role in the genocide. Well, many of us knew their role from day one, you see. But they're apologizing, that's not enough for what happened in Rwanda, you know? But we will accept that because they have competition from the Chinese. Yes, and people applaud that. No, the Chinese is not in Africa to profit Africa. The Chinese is in Africa to profit China. The Brits is in Africa to profit Brits. The French is in Africa to profit France. And America is in Africa with its military secretly all over the place to profit America. Their embassies have one mission: to promote the corporate consolidation of the wealth of Africa. They're not there to give you green cards. They're not there to give you visas to their country, because most times they don't give you anything. They're there to manipulate the political bodies that they've helped to put in place and the political system that they've helped to design to allow their corporate structure to write what appears to be legal trade contracts for them to rob us in broad daylight under world laws and protocols that they have written, none of which is in Africa's favor.
We go to the question of identity, and particularly when we talked about language. Now, if we look at all the nations of the earth, it is only the African that doesn't have a unique language, like King Maponga, or you said earlier. But I want us to dig even deeper. If you look at Germany, which we're talking about, after all this war, Germany had to redefine its identity, and the first criteria was their language. Now, even the English that we're talking about, the English or the Brits, you know, they had to redefine the word. And so they had to change everything. First thing was the language, which is English. The French, the same thing with their French. They had to redefine their identity. The first criteria was the language. Now we go even to China. I mean, China is somehow a kind of a superpower, because first thing is its identity, which is the primary factor is a language. Now we go into smaller other developmental countries that are coming on. Look at India, Russia, Romania, all. Why on earth is a whole continent called Africa with a union having, in just Cameroon alone, you have more than how many ethnic groups and different petit quartier, quarter languages. Now, how are we going to, we just want to focus first on language. How could a union, so it shows already the division. So it's not a union that has the common interest for a common language. King Maponga?
We have a proverb in my tribe that says, you cannot cut a piece of cloth, or you cannot cut your leather piece that is covering your private parts to make a hat out of it. You know, sounds very, very controversial. You know, you don't cut your leather that protects your reproductive system, and then you make a hat out of it. It only says the interpretation would therefore mean you cannot expose more important assets to cover the least important, and you leave other issues more vulnerable. Our language is our identity. Our language is our science. It is our software. Our language speaks of our past. our interaction with each other, with the cosmology, and with our neighbors. Our language keeps for us the connecting information passed on from generation to generation, whether it is the naming of trees and plants. You find that in African languages, these names already come with meaning and usage of those plants, for example. When you mention a tree and you call it gavakava, the bitter one, that when you swallow it, it kicks out other things. So by throwing away language, you're actually throwing away a science at a deeper level. English, by all honesty, in as much as it is a communicative platform, which our generations are using it. But if you go back to language, you may find that we are forfeiting far much more. Instead of taking our languages as centers of divisions, they must be centers of study. Because if you can put all these African languages together with the people who know their language, you may actually come up with a new software, totally, which speaks to expression, which speaks to medicine, which speaks to fashion and relationships. For example, in Zulu, we don't call you a woman. That's not what you are. We don't call Elder Small a man, because that's not what he is. We call you as a woman Ndlovukazi or Nkosikazi, the one who births a king. When we look at a woman, she is actually the channel through which the king will come. So there is no king who owns a chair. The one who owns a chair is the one who is sitting on the lower chair, because what is in her will come and sit on this chair. Therefore, power is not on the man on the chair, but power is on the woman who is sitting on the side of her, because her seed is being incubated for this chair. So every king is a custodian to protect the woman and her seed. She will come and sit here. You look at a man, for example, Inkos. A man is a king. A son is also identified as a younger king. A daughter is identified as a younger queen. So in terms of language, when we undermine the value of language, we lose our respect lines.
Correct.
You cannot talk to your father and say you, me, you. This is cheap language. But let's take note again of another wavelength on top of the language, which I want to extend the thought to. Religion has given us another language through which we are functioning as Africans. Take it on record. The wars in Nigeria right now have nothing to do with Nigeria as a country, or Oduduwa. The wars of Oduduwa are not based on politics. The wars of Nigeria are on religion. Why? Because religion comes with language. Religion comes with economic language. Religion comes with political language. Religion comes with cultural interactions. And then we find that where Islam is more propagated, Arabic language becomes a much more venerated and respected language above the local languages. Mm-hmm. Christianity comes with its English, with its French and Germany. You go to school to study, you must study Greek, you must study Hebrew, you must study all these things. Some of these languages are even dead. We could even call them dead languages. But because the religion you are imbibing already has the language, we would find that all the academic people, with those who are doing law, you have to study Latin to understand whether instead of studying Ma'at, which is the more indigenous hieroglyphics concept where the 10 Commandments are coming from. So when you begin to talk about language, I want to stretch you further and say, what is the economic language of the continent? Mm-hmm. What is the religious language of the continent? Mm-hmm. What is the political language of the continent? Mm-hmm. Because right now the political language is that of democracy. And you look back at democracy, democracy either has morality, it either has spirituality, mm-hmm. Its honesty is to its masters, who bring in its own cultures, whether we understand them or not. Because you signed up a democratic treaty, you must accept even some cultural norms that are outside of your African space. So it's not just about language. The language of dress, for example, the language of fashion, the language of diet. So for me, language is not just words in which we speak. You're a communication specialist. You know the difference between a verbal language, verbal communication, non-verbal communication. But when it comes to language, our problems are actually buried in our language. What sort of language do we use when we are talking politics right now as African politicians in Africa Union? What is the language? And what prompted this program, by the way, was the issue that there was a language, there was information that was being taken out of Africa Union every night between 1 and 2 a.m. in the morning. After the Chinese finished building the Africa Union building in Addis Ababa, they bagged the toilets, they bagged the boardrooms, they bagged all the offices, and every night, without fail, information is moving, language is moving. The economic language that is being discussed in the boardroom ended up in China, in Shanghai, by the morning. All the strategies of politics that you're discussing, the language for me is much, much bigger than just the words that are coming out of our tongues. We need to find out as Africans, what sort of language are we using in developing the continent to the next level? So it's not just Swahili as a language. We're looking at the entire framework of communication of Africans, the way in which we put value on each other, on our materials, on our relationship, the software which we use. Take note of the language, the software that we use to transmit information to each other. That is language for me. So when you say we're looking for a common language, it might even sound to me we're looking for a common vision. We are looking for a common strategy. We are looking for a common economy. We are looking for a common political conversation. We are looking for a common cultural preservation. We are looking for a common reparation and retribution sort of strategy. We are looking at common law systems. We are looking at a common cultural rebuilding. And so for me, it is much, much bigger. And when I speak like that to Dr. Small, when I speak like that to a white man, do they hear my language? We are distorted in our language because what our politicians are saying and what our common people are saying, what our royalties are saying, what our academic institutions are saying, what our hospitals are saying, they're all speaking different languages. And as we sit right here, you can actually sense the tension. We are talking about Africa Union. What Africa Union is saying vis-a-vis what we are saying, we may all be speaking in English, but we're not speaking the same language. So in terms of preservation of African language, I'm looking at the ethos of African existence as a people. What are we saying, number one, to ourselves? What are we saying to each other? And what are we saying to those that are around us concerning our resources, concerning ourselves, concerning our future, concerning our present, concerning our past? What are we saying when we go to school? What are we saying? When we go to churches, what are we saying? When we go to government, what are we saying? What is the language of our liberation? Hear me very well. What is the language of our liberation?
Professor James Small?
Well, that's why you're the king, King Maponga, you see. The only thing I can add, the only thing I can add to this and be strategic, because the question of language, as you so wonderfully explained, you know, language is like a vessel. It's a ship. It's a vessel. It carries everything that makes a people be a people. It is your library. It is your university. It is your research center. It's all in the language. And so I would like to loan to the conversation this. Like Dr. Tata says, if we looked at Cameroon, we see the multiple languages, but we know if we brought them all in a room and sat down, that we're really talking about one or two languages because they are all aspects of one another. We should not even call them languages in that sense, because they are all saying the same thing. The sun is the sun. Its relationship to me on earth, when understood, is the same in whatever language Africa has. We know, I know King Maponga, and I know there is a language that's universal. We know, you and I know, in the craft or the place of the secrets, that we speak a language, even in thought, that is universal to the continent. For the few who still participate in our ancient wisdom system. So I know there's some things most of our people don't know, but we are at the bridge of freedom at this point. We do have, if I was to go, say my friend from Chad, Tumpu Bye, God bless his soul. He's from the tribe of the Sa-Ra. And when he invited me to Chad many decades ago, because of something I did in a dream, my compensation, if you want to call it that, was to come home, get barefoot, and go in the bush. And you will come out knowing how to talk to all of those who understand who we are. I don't think it's that difficult for us to even formulate what that language would be, because our language systems are part of a greater African language system, and they speak to the same cosmological and ecological wisdom understanding. I'm trying not to get too esoteric with it, but I want to make the statement, because sometimes we think, oh, it's impossible because we have all of these languages. No. The reason the average child in Ghana can speak 5 languages, because there's a relationship to those 5 languages to one another. Is he speaking 5 languages, or is he speaking aspects of one language? And so I think we need to have our scholarship really get serious about studying our languages. As the king just explained, what the extent and intent of language is, and the content of the intent of language. Because it's that vessel that carries everything we are. When I say God or Supreme Being, or when I say it in English, they hear one thing. But when I say it in an African language, they hear something else. And so we have to know that. So even when your enemy is in your face smiling and it appears you're speaking the same language, you must realize that you're being informed one way and they're being informed another way. And the king said that. But I don't think it's difficult for us to come up with the formula for what language would be universal to the continent, because all of them do the same thing. If you go to any of our languages and you look up what do they mean by people, person, place, or thing, you will find the suffix or the prefix on the word for people, person, place, or thing all means the creator. Okay. Let me say that again. We are talking about person, people, place, or thing in an African language. The suffix or the prefix, in most cases, it's the prefix, is our language's word for the creator. To say that all things are an extension of the thing we call the creator. And your language informs you what your relationship is to that creation. I think you've heard me say on this show before, the woman's womb. My Baba, my Nana, and my king just said it again. The only way any God creates is through your womb. And there's no stork dropping the baby. It's not growing out of the ground. It's not floating down from the air. The womb of the African woman carries out the function of creation for the totality of creation itself. You're that aspect of God, not the tool of God, an aspect, an integral part of what we call the God that carries out the process of creation. Otherwise, there's no creation. But your language should explain that to you in a way so that you know immediately who you are.
Correct.
And what your function is. But the key thing is that African may have thousands of dialects, but if the minds sit down, we can weave them back into the original language that produced all the dialects to start with. I don't think it's an issue that's too great. It's just an issue that we've not appropriately dealt with.
Okay.
To solve that problem.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think just we're saying basically analyzing the challenges, looking for a way forward. Because if we look like what King Maponga is saying or what you're saying, we would have to come up with some new dynamics that create that language of our liberation, like he's saying. Now, I take a very small example. When the computers were brought into use, now they had to define algorithms. And so they had the programming language that became universal to be able to manage that software that he's saying. So for instance, and what you're saying, Professor James, is what if we just, like King Maponga said, our skills people, these language developers, pick up all the elements from all the cultures and come up with one new unique language. So we would be avoiding probably this issue of, oh, it's my dialect, it's my this. But this one is a liberation language. I noted it down. What is the language of our liberation? So it has to be something that is defining us in the process of our liberation now. Right now, we're not. So that's also something that is been noted. The next question, we're going to talk about spirituality.
Let me add something, Susan.
Yes.
One
please.
does not have to give up their ethnic peculiarity linguistically.
Yes.
To function in a universal African language setting. You see.
Okay.
You are your mother and your father's child. You do not have to become my mother and father's child for you and I to be brothers and sisters.
Mm.
So the universal language already exists. We have to decipher. It contains all of these other languages and dialects that we are now using. You do not have to stop using them at the level and context you do, to use your universal language that encapsulate all of them at the same time.
Mm. Okay. Beautiful. Thank you, Prof. I would say we're going to the topic of spirituality. Now, another critical example again. Europe have their Christianity, or their, yes. And Indians have their Hindus. Chinese, they have their Cantonese, not Cantonese, they have their Buddha, right? And how on earth does an Africa that has a union, that has a people, a race of people, it doesn't have one single, let's say, a tool that connects our spirituality? King Maponga.
Very, very deep question, I should say. Very deep question. And I don't want to take it for granted. I will be deliberate in my answer for the purposes of clarity. Look at it from the Judeo-Christian perspective. That the entire Bible is bathed in blood, where a God directs his people, a God confiscates land that belongs to another people, and a God blesses another nation with an inheritance that belongs to another nation. To date, the war of the Middle East is a war of gods. And the whole concept of the chosen nation becomes a colonial concept where the one who is chosen has permission to abuse the one who is not chosen. Religion, therefore, becomes a tool of segregation when those who are of the chosen blood have their God on their side, who will bless them and assist them to destroy those that are barbarians, that are heathens, and that are Gentiles. You see, if you don't understand that concept, you will not be able to understand the mindset of a Muslim who will take his knife and sword and chop off heads because someone refuses to become Muslim. You will not understand the mindset, the psychology of a European who walks up into land and he proclaims that this is the land, the Afrikaners in South Africa, who say this is the land that God gave them. God gave them this land because they believed in Christianity. And Christianity because it works with Jesus and the God that is being proclaimed. Wherever their foot places themselves, they will own that land. There are verses in the Bible that are written like that. I'll give you whichever land where your feet will get to. I want you to understand the danger of religion when it is in the hands of a political mindset to abuse cultural systems. At the end of the day, this business is a business of gods. Whose God is more stronger than the other? And whose God can subdue the other? And when you subdue the God, the people of that land become servants twice, to you as a warrior and to your God, to which they must now pay homage. When you look at spirituality, therefore, you're looking at a totally different mindset in terms of me being an African custodian of such a knowledge. Our spirituality has nothing to do with the book and recitation of verses. Our spirituality is our relationship, number one, with our water. Number two, the relationship with our air. Number three, the relationship with our land. So the African therefore spends his life interacting with these elements. That gives him a relationship with himself, with the elements that are around him. Now, when you understand the African mindset of spirituality, swords and spears are not part of our spirituality, because once you have killed another person, your hands are dirty and your spirituality and your gods cannot accept you with dirty hands. That's why we are called Abangoni, which means actually the righteous ones, the ones who don't get involved in dirty things that destroy themselves and destroy each other. But unfortunately, the African did not notice that Eurocentric religious expressions would come in the glove of education, will come in the glove of legislation and governance, and ultimately, by accepting the Eurocentric framework of religion, we actually accepted a Trojan horse that now says, love your enemies, number one. Number two, if a man claps you on one cheek, give him the other cheek. Number three, pray for those that persecute you. And the cherry on the cake, slaves obey your masters. Now, you look at this theological framework that is indoctrinated into the heads of the young, maintained by the old, and managed by the priests. It's a brothel of faith, where the religious leaders are pimps at the doors of the sodomy of African culture and African people. We cannot speak of spirituality in the framework of Eurocentric mindsets, which gives you one day a week when you must become Christian, the other days you must go to work. To an African, if I'm drinking my water, it's a religious expression. A bit in my mouth, a bit on the ground, and I pass on the calabash to another person that is there. Sharing is right there. If I'm eating, a bit to the ground, a bit to my neighbor, take a piece of meat, and I break to the one that is younger than me. There is society right there, and community is right there. So when you speak of spirituality in the African space, it is a daily manifestation, appreciation of the environment in which I'm living in. European religious systems are schizophrenic by nature, because you must have this personality when you are in this place, and that personality when you are on the other place. And in conclusion, the European gods don't know the African. Because if the African comes with his drum, with his language, with his clothes, and he walks up into a church, the pastors will be traumatized. Because this is barbaric. And God cannot deal with an African when he looks like an African. God of the Bible and God of the Europeans can only deal with the African when he has removed these things. And he puts on a jacket and a tie. And he responds to music that is on an organ and etc. Then he has become spiritual. Which by now, Corona has told us. The church needs us. We don't need it. And if there is no church in our hearts, we're wasting our time in the building that they call the church. So African spirituality is actually that which connects us. And in the words of Dr. Small, that is the language, that is the blood that flows in all of us. And as Africans, we can connect with Umvelingangi, the one from everlasting to everlasting. Unkulunkulu, the one who birthed our grandfathers. Mwari, the one who lives inside us. Gainyame, the one through whom everything that is has become. So when you begin to teach an African of a Jesus who died on a cross, we don't have such kind of theology in African spaces where you hang a man on a tree and then you say, this man serves you. We have millions of people that have suffered here. The question is, where is the savior for the African? And if the Jesus of the Bible gives the Jews Palestine as their inheritance, question, Dr. Tata, what has this Jesus given to the African? And what has Muhammad and Allah given to the African? And if your religion cannot be translated to economics, to politics, to governance, to culture, it remains as a potted plant in the hands of colonial masters. And Africans have been made to look after potted plants. True spirituality, break the vase, plant the idea on local ground, let it sing and eat and breathe from the local soil. Then we and our God become one. Maari, Maari. He is in me. I am in him. And hence when I look at you, I don't look at you only as one person. That's why in Shona, when I greet you, I say, Makadini. And that is plural. That's not singular. Because in looking at you as a singular, I miss the plurality that is in you for continuity and African posterity. Therefore, there's none amongst us who is singular. We are all plural because within us, around us, from where we are coming from, we are incubators of history, of genes, of history that connects us to ourselves. And on the four grandfathers on your right-hand side, from your father's side, on the four grandfathers and grandmothers on your left-hand side, representing your mother, you take the four on the right, the four on the left, you put them together, the four make the two. There you have your diamond, the great entrance into this life, which is actually women are the official gates through which we are born into this life. And these two, they birth you, who is the one. So by talking to you, I'm actually talking to the ancestors through which you have become an existing human being. African spirituality therefore understands that if I can put my four tribes on the right, four tribes on the left, and I put them together, the four give me the 16, the 16 give me the 64, the 64, it's exponential. At the end of 7 to 10 generations, you may actually find that we as a people of Ntu, we as a people of Bantu, we as a people of Heru and Kemet, we are actually having a common ancestor, and our women have become the bowl, the dish, the waters, in the salt waters of the sea, which the spiritual has been translated to become physical. That's why the waters of the women which lie in their wombs become the spiritual center, where the things that are invisible become visible. That's African spirituality. God is a woman, and through whom we all have become.
Wow.
I want my king to know I will never come on a show with him again because he leaves me speechless.
Well, we're sharing that, my Lord. Yes. I'm on mainland. I'm on mainland. I'm still next to the river. You are upstream. It
is so beautiful. You know, I say it simply that spirituality is your reality. It is your relationship to cosmology and ecology. I love you, the only other person in the world that go backwards like that I know. Because when we go backwards from the 1 to the 2 to the 4 to the 8 to the 16 to the 32 to the 64, eventually you invert and end up back as the 1. So nothing exists. It's like saying Jinyami, Naninyami, in Akan. Nothing exists but God.
Without.
So what are we? Just aspects of that greater existence. So we may say, oh, we come from multiple tribes. Oh, we come from multiple linguistic systems. No, we're the same being that has been expressed in multiple ways. And that means, like the Ewe in the Volta region of Ghana would say, Sogbelisa. The totality of creation is divinity itself. So,
to make it more practical, maybe Dr. Tata, while
yes.
we're on it, thank you very much, Prof. To make it more practical, for example, our totemic connections, synonyms are new. We did not have synonyms. Synonyms are a new invention that came with masters so that slaves could be known where they are and where they belong. That's why we end up now with a name and synonym. But to go back in our African space, we don't have synonyms. We have tribal and clan names, which are totemic. There are 3 types of totems that you would find. Number 1 are the totems of the waters. Number 2 are the totems of the mountains. Number 3 are the totems of the air. Again, on our spirituality. Therefore, if you pick up any African child from wherever they are, and you would say you are a lion, for example, as your totem, in all various languages, the lion is a lion. Then you get to Malawi, the same lion becomes the totem, the Bandas. You get to Zimbabwe, they become the Sibandas. You get to South Africa, they become the Mutaungs. You get to the Xhosas, they become the Mgonyamas. It's one totem, different languages. Take note. But they're actually saying within our migrations as Africans, if you are related to the lion, you are actually coming from a single source. Therefore, you cannot allow a Mtaung in South Africa, if you are educated enough, to marry a Banda from Malawi, because in terms of their genealogies, they are actually connected to the same totemic kind of departure. You go to the Mukanyas, for example, who are the Piris in Malawi, with the great monkey, the Rafikis of Kenya and Tanzania and Congo and Guruswa. When they get to Zimbabwe, they are the Vudzigenas, the rulers of the great Zimbabwe, the Mwenemtapas. You get to Botswana, they become the Kabos. You get to KwaNdebele, they are the Skosanas. You get to the Xhosa land, they become the Jambases, the Lisas, the Mtolos, the Chwene in Lesotho, the Fakudzes in Swaziland. It's one big surname. And when you begin to understand our totemic connections to each other as Africans, and this is true from Djibouti to Lesotho, from Swaziland to Congo. If you ask your name, I'm Susan Tata. Okay, what's your totem? If you don't know, go back to your grandmothers. You may find that you are related to the crocodile, you are related to the fish, you are related to the bird, you are related to the buffalo, you are related to the rabbit, you are related to the hyena, and all these totems give you actually the division. And within our totemic connections, again, that's where our conservation was actually inculcated in. It means that if I belong to the buffalo, when I go hunting, I don't kill a buffalo because the buffalo is my relative. So basically, you already find there's a conservation concept within the African concept. You don't eat everything. You don't kill everything, but you are related to everything. And if you look at your 4 totems again, as I give you now, and you get those animals and you put them together, it then gives you the esoteric explanation of the temperaments, the attitudes, the relationships that you have with nature, with yourself. And again, when you understand that, marriages begin to have a conversation there. Those that are in the mountains, it is dangerous to marry those that are in the mountains. Wars will break up in your house. The relationships will not work. You need to find again, how do you mix the totems of the mountains with the totems of the rivers, and the totems of the rivers with the totems of the air. And in the event where the two totems are mixed together, then traditional ceremonies come into place to try and cleanse these animals to make sure that they can live together with each other. That's the science which our forefathers have left with us. And in the abundance of books, we have lost the spirituality of our very existence.
That was absolutely beautiful. That was absolutely beautiful. Let me just take the youngsters who play with Kemet and Egypt back to something to connect to what our King Maponga has said. The oldest book they found written on anything called spirituality or religion in that written documentary form, the Medunecha hieroglyph, is called the Pyramid Text. And in this text, written by Africans to describe very much what our king is describing, the people who made up ancient Egypt did not grow up out of the waters of the Nile. They came from all over Africa and converged because that was a cosmopolitan ecological expression that allowed for so much to happen. So people came from everywhere and loaned themselves to one idea, which they brought from all over the continent. And so in this book, the Pyramid Text, creation says of itself and calls itself Amen. He says, I created myself out of myself. I caused existence to exist so that existing might exist. And when I found that I existed, Ma'at, truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, balance, and reciprocity was at my side. And I coughed up Shu, meaning the air. And I spat out Shu, the air. And I coughed up Tefnut, which are the gases, the moisture. And they gave birth to Nut, which are the elements that makes up the bodies. And they gave birth to Geb, which is the earth that we set on. Then out of Geb came Asar and Aset. And they gave birth to Haru. And there were others. But in the end of the dissertation, Amen, which has now become Amen Ra, the idea and the manifestation of the idea, says, I came into being out of my mother, Nun, which is the primordial water, or what we might call in quantum physics, liquid matter, which gave birth to Ptah, which is represented by a mountain, representing the first manifestation to our ancestors of solid matter. What he just got through saying is the whole book of the Pyramid Text. It's the book of the dead, so-called, the Pur Em Haru, who the whites call the pyramid, the book of the dead. We call it the Pur Em Haru, the coming out of the darkness into the light. Our system is not as fragmented as we think. But because we are not taught our history and our culture, we can only see ourselves in the fragments that the enemy have projected us in. And what our Nana has just showed us is that we're not fragmented except in our own vision, which is a false vision based on an illusion, and has caused us to create ourselves as a hologram of someone else's illusion. You see? So culture, at its core, what we call sensuality is at the core of culture. And culture is given birth to by language, which contains all of the element of people need to be. So that's why we can easily say our spirituality must be a reflection of our reality.
And just one good one, we have Nomkubulwane in Zulu, which they might also translate Mabele Made, the woman with the long breast, that she is able to feed her son or daughter on her back. Mabele Made also speaks of a woman with a long breast. When she throws it across the river, the other children can drink and breastfeed from there. It's a figure of speech which says every other nation that is across the river, they also breastfeed from the same breast with yourself. It speaks of migration, that while we're moving away from Embo kingdoms in the Great Nile, and we started moving away from each other tribes remained on the other side of the river as the other tribes proceeded across the river. So Mabele Made, Nomkubulwane, begins to speak of our great-grandmother who breastfed all of us across the river. In one sentence, when you see another tribe across the river, they also breastfed from the same breast that you've breastfed on.
Wow. We coming back to the question of the day. So it's impossible, or it would be right for us to understand that this Africa that we're looking now, or the union that is representing us, something else has to be out of it. Like in the beginning, we started, I think it was you, King Maponga, or no, Professor James Moore, who said, if the keepers of this union don't understand the indigenous culture, all these aspects that we've just been talking about as a symbolic element that should unite us and connect us. So we don't even need to have, you know, a divisive. If we all just know our totems, so we just know this history and this background, our spirituality, our religion, our language, we're still going to get to other aspects of next week's Spatial Sunday, which I hope all of you again would be the guests, because this part of what we're building now is the roadmap to everything that we've been looking for, trying to reform something that is an illusion that probably will not work, needs an alternative, or how do we approach it? So we go back to the fundamental question. If we are looking forward to a united Africa, do we really think that the structures that we have in place would achieve that? I go back to you, King Maponga.
We have a challenge. I don't want to call it a problem. We have a challenge and a disjoint of information that many of us have had to go through a rotten academic system, and you only become Pan-African, you become conscious outside of the mainstream academic institutions that are on the table right now. Inclusive to that is literature and association. Mm-hmm. We somehow think that mysteriously Africans are going to come together without an intentional educational, academic, entertainment, spiritual conversation that might have to begin as early as cradle roll in kindergarten.
Yes.
Backtrack a little. The Chinese people start teaching yoga, kung fu, and meditation to kids who are in creche and kindergarten. Because by so doing, you are able to capture their worldview, capture their mindset towards a common national building strategy. Unfortunately, our kids are watching Casper and the Friendly Ghost. They are watching Beauty and the Beast. They are watching all sorts of other information that does not build the unity amongst themselves, amongst each other, and amongst fellow African countries. I would always be a propagator of a 400-year plan, which is a long-term strategy to undo the 400 years of oppression that we went through. We are here where we are right now, 400 years later. And there's no way in the wildest of our imagination that we can think that in 5 or 10 years, we can actually turn this thing around. Our transformation must be intentional. Our transformation must be academic. Our transformation must be culturally alert. In the midst of that, because we don't have time on our side, it must be vigorous. In some certain cases, it must be violent. Whereby Eurocentric academic systems that are being taught in our universities, some of those books need to be banned and thrown away to the deepest parts of hell. We cannot be studying William Shakespeare right now, plagiarisms of the books of Kemet stolen from the Alexandra libraries and stuff like that. We'll be naive to think that we can feed our academic minds with recycled garbage of European mindsets and hope that the students who are coming out of these institutions are going to be passionate about Africa.
Correct.
I beg to differ in many cases with this ideology of Pan-Africanism, because Pan-Africanism in some certain cases has become an extension of the democratic systems of European construct. So at the end of the day, even by being Pan-Africanist does not mean that you're going to make Pan-Africa or make Africa your priority. We would not be where we are right now with all our presidents who call themselves Pan-Africanists, but they sit around to approve the protocols of the colonialists. Then what does it mean to become Pan-Africanist? I want to backtrack to what I said very early on your shows when you started up. United Kingdoms of Africa. UKA. United Kingdoms of Africa. Because colonialism was not signed with or by politicians. It was signed by royalties. Royalties have land. Royalties are custodians of culture. Royalties are actually the backbone. What keeps Britain together is not the parliament. It is a common royal understanding of their monarchs and everyone in that kingdom saying that they are subjects. Even on colonialism, they were making vassal states and African countries to become subjects of the royal monarch. Now, if you don't understand that psychology, you will not understand the judicial system, where our people still dress up like crazy little British midgets with those white wigs hanging on their heads. You won't understand the banking system. You won't understand the political system. If you don't understand, you throw away your own kings in your land to become subjects of a white woman. At the end of the day, the very system that you are running away from, you end up on the same system, but in an educated, democratic fashion. The question that you're asking me, of course, as to how and when should we possibly begin to look at creating a narrative that takes us to the past, to take us to the future. I'm not saying let's go back and put on skins and live under bridges and destroy these things that we now have. We already have a platform. But in my tribe, we say when the pumpkins grow into your neighbor's house, they no longer belong to you. They belong to your neighbor. In other words, things and the systems that have now come into our spaces of function, we can utilize some of those systems to the best of our abilities without necessarily throwing away ourselves. Therefore, understanding of self and our continent becomes primary to us beginning to fight. And the best way, by the way, Dr. Small, I read this small little proverb somewhere, I can't remember who wrote it. The best way to fight a colonial system, the best way to fight it is to embrace your own.
Sure.
You don't need to lift a sword. You don't need to lift a spear or get a gun. An African must simply say, I will be African, as you are also European, and we don't have to fight. If I make a strike, I will not eat pizza. The Italian companies will close their shops in less than 2-3 years because no one will go and buy the pizza. There's no war. We are simply embracing our own culture. You can run with your own culture. So therefore, the resistance that we need to start developing amongst ourselves is self-knowledge. And I think many of our professors who have gone ahead of us have created these big concepts, which are true, but how do people now powder them and dilute them into practical living habits? That's where I am at, that we don't need to be looking for guns. Let's look for identity. Leave our identity and be truthful to ourselves. The colonial system will collapse. We refuse to bank our money in their banks. We refuse to take their drugs. We refuse to put on their clothes. We refuse to take their narrative. We refuse to give our money to those that are oppressing us. The colonial system will collapse without a single bullet shot into the air. The best way to fight a colonial system is by embracing your own.
Thank you very much, my king. I think these words are not new on the Pan-African Daily TV, particularly those who know Professor James Small has always been the anthem of the day. Know your history, it will erase the mystery. I belong to you, you belong to me. Professor Baina has been saying this thing, knowledge of self. So the moment we embrace our own, you make automatically the existing systems irrelevant. If we go to our spirituality, we don't embrace all this, automatically the churches would close and go, no business, fire urban, go home, right? We don't buy from all these shops and anything, no money in your pocket, and no gun is going to come to our doorsteps and say, go and order, or you buy it through Amazon. Professor James Small, that has been your core message every day here, drumming, just like King Maponga is saying, what is new?
The truth is essentiality. Is central, no matter who says it. The way Malcolm X, my teacher, said what my king just said, he says, own the land, control the labor and the resources where you live. He says, be in control of the economics, the politics, and the culture where you live. Your purpose is to make sure your people have food, clothing, shelter, safety, and security where they live. How do we obtain this? And our king just told us, we have to become us. We have to embrace Africa. Dr. Asa Hilliard, another teacher, said, your identity must be, in order to realize freedom, you must be shackled to your identity. Only when you're shackled to your identity is the realization of freedom possible. And that's exactly what King Maponga has just said so beautifully. This war that we're in, we've tried the guns and the spears and the arrows. And in most cases, even when we've won, we have become them. And we have killed us. Yes, there are occasions where we must use violence strategically with full intentions to accomplish certain things. But for the most part, once we decide to pursue a path to return to the African way of being the human, they're out of the game. I think it was Professor Akinjobin, a Nigerian professor. He was talking about the Yoruba culture. And he said that culture is everything a people do in their interests. It is culture that makes you belong to one another. It is culture that protects you from genocide. And there are times when some things in the culture are no longer useful for the circumstances and conditions you find yourself in, so you discard them for newer things that will accomplish the mission you're currently faced with. And so we've had so many ancestors that have come to tell us the singular truth. Love thyself, know thyself. When I love me, Dr. Tata and King Maponga, I love you. You are me. I am you. You see, I learned to love you by learning to love the African essence that is me. It's more powerful than our people know. This is not cliche. This is behavior that must be undertaken with the intentions of returning to the African being again.
Correct. I think we have touched the very, very essential essence of our basis. After being 1 year on this very conversation, we went back to where we started. I think just like King Maponga is saying, He's been developing a lot of concepts in the farmers of thought, even the stool and the stick where we can measure mathematical formulas and everything. Now, when I understand, or truly we understand when he said, at some point we have to be violent and aggressive, I understand like being aggressive is how do I redefine me, but not in a luxurious way, not like I'm comfortable. I have to fight to get back myself. And so knowledge of myself is just what I need. So I don't need to be comfortable knowing that, oh, I need to go and get a book from the library. I need to make a 360-degree turn from now and just say everything that I see here, if it doesn't look like me, then I'm out of space. I think the aggressiveness, we will not need that 400 years. We will not need it if we just go back to our Africanness. And I think that's the new definition that we're talking about, the Pan-Africanism, not in the political systems, but just making our kingdoms relevant and the very values that we all stood for. If we will have one, only just one, now we already have multiples, but we're saying if we will have one, like we were saying, even in a major sport where all our attentions can be focused on, then I think we are not going to make it in less than the time that we're talking about. I want to thank all of you, particularly the viewers. Finally today, for the first time again, yes, finally today, for the first time again, we are hitting 1,000 viewers on our multiple platforms. On YouTube alone, we're almost 500, and on the other platforms, that is historic. Now, we would not end this session. We know that King Maponga has been very busy, has missed 2 opportunities or rendezvous, as we can say in the borrowed French language, to be with us here because of 2 very essential things that I would like him to share with us. We just saw you, King Maponga, getting a doctorate degree and this colorful ceremony out there. I didn't want to rush to say it before you were here. And then later on, I know that for the past 2 months or 1 month after your book, Knowing Your Truth, we announced it on Pan-African Daily TV, and you were supposed to be here. Unfortunately, on that day, we were kicked out of the stream, and you too, for a week. So do you just want to go back to the essence of this too? Now you had an honorary degree, doctorate, and then now the knowledge of or know your truth. I know the book is already sold out on the continent, and the diaspora is still waiting. Our fans are still waiting. What is going on, King Maponga?
Good news. The book is available as of Friday on Amazon. Those who are good with e-copies, please punch the buttons and support. I'm not very excited above the moon with Find Your Truth. I want to take the money from there and develop the gospel according to Maponga J. But it's a beautiful bridge for all recovering addicts of Christianity and Islam. I wrote it with that understanding deliberately to allow the inquiry. The book is made out of more than 60% questions, all within the greater religious, economic, historical space. It's a small little offering for those who are addicted to Christianity who now want to move to find their African roots. I allowed that book, referencing here and there, working from the unknown, from the known to the unknown. It's a very deliberate kind of work that I have done. It's available. I send you a picture there on your WhatsApp. You can attach it at the bottom there, people. But it's on Amazon and on Kindle. Find Your Truth. Find Your Truth. The hard copies, I think it may take another few days or so while we are populating that space. The recognition for community contribution comes from Emmanuel International Theological Seminary, where some archbishops and pastors felt they wanted to recognize the work that I have done. I have also been approached by Sadak University, who are organizing another honorary, and even University of South Africa, UNISA, locally. Some of the works that I have done also in the community participation. It's a great honor. I'm humbled and I'm thankful. I got a call this week, I think, from Zambia, for some academic work also. Gambia is also calling me, and the academic institutions there. And one of my books is actually being used in Massachusetts. In one of the universities, there's a theological book for some of the space. But I think it's a contribution that we are making out there, and fellow Africans beginning to recognize each other in what we are doing for participation. For what it is worth, I'm thankful and I'm grateful. Even without the academic recognition, we would still continue doing what we are doing. For some people choose their paths. Some people, their paths choose them.
Okay. Professor James Moore, I was thinking about this book. No, King Joshua, you can't just come and just tell us where to get the book. Remember, we had a discussion, you and I. We would have to go through the principles of that book, because when you were here the first time, the first thing that the audience was requesting is, we need an alternative Bible. That was the question that pushed forward that work. And I'm very grateful you went through that work, because we are saying it would be difficult for make these other systems irrelevant if we don't propose or provide alternatives. So we want to know that Know Your Truth should be that contemporary work. But we also know that a lot of Africans have been putting out this literature and this kind of indigenous work out there in forms of books. So I would like us to make a date again where we go through that book and all the books.
I think for the best part, hold my hand on Find Your Truth. I will make the gospel according to Maponga J, which is the Bible. I think I will make available every 150 chapters as we go along. That book will take me the next 30 years. I've committed to writing a chapter every 2 to 3 days as I'm going along. So as I'm downloading the information from our ancestors every night between 3 and 7 in the morning, then I write that information down as I'm going forward. I will surely need the participation of Professor Small as we go along, for parts and editing, punctuating here and there, footnotes of some Kemetic knowledge system. No man is an island. I would want to extend that invite to my honorable professor. I know he's busy, but if he can donate also some few hours and we think together, it's a project that 3, 4, 5 of us can come together for the couple of years that are remaining in us to try and consolidate an African encyclopedia, which we can give back to the African continent. And it's a basic, simple tool. When you receive the book, translate it firstly in your indigenous language and teach your children. I'll be watching you from the other side as I am observing and enjoying the transformation. But yes, it is a work that I'm working on every day. But for the purposes of you being alive in this generation, I think I'll break it into phases. Maybe every 100, 150 chapters, I will let them go, and I'll let them go for the next 30 years. So it's nothing I can promise that it will be done in 2 days or in 3 days. It's work in progress. And as long as I breathe, I will constantly be writing. But for now, you have Find Your Truth and another 4 or 5 books that I've also done, Going Places in the Spirit, Shopping Skills, So You Want to Be the Master, Women in the Kitchen, and African Solutions.
Wonderful. Professor James?
Yes. Congratulations again, my King Maponga. That's extraordinary work to that, and I'll be more than honored to assist in any small way that I can. And I know one of my big King brother is also watching us today, Nana Kwabana and Kasia, the 5th of Esukado. So I know he would be someone I'd love to see you and him interact. And so I know Nana is here and he's heard me. And I, like you, I respect our royalty because they are the embodiment of the ancestors where they are. And if we don't understand, when we were talking today, there was sometimes when Joshua was speaking But there were some times when Maponga, the ancestors, were speaking. And we have to know the difference when we hear them come to us through their vessels that they've embodied themselves in for us. You understand me?
Yes. Me, Joshua, yes.
Yes. So it is no way forward except back to Africa. There's no other pathway. There's no side streets. There's no shortcuts. The only way for us to become again, and to be, is the direct path back to our African being. That is to our ancestors. They are us. They live in us. And because we don't know our history, we leave them asleep. When we learn our history, we wake them up. They are your primary teachers. They're the ones that will teach you. What we can do, and what we do, is stimulate you to turn around and look back. It's like the Ghana Sankofa. Go back and fetch it. What are you going back to fetch? The wisdom of your ancestors to become the tools of today for your use in developing your freedom. And just let me make one comment on the African Union. I hope that those who listen understand that what we're saying in this discussion is, here is some of the functions that we would want to see from an African Union as an instrument. If they can understand what we're saying, it's not so much a negative criticism as to say the tool you currently use and in the manner in which you're using the tool only gives minimal success. There are other tools available for your use. It's in your culture, it's in your language, it's in your ancestral traditions, because they will give you your intention. And all intent comes with content, or all content is guided to intent. And so if we would change our course, a cultural revolution is absolutely necessary. That means the changing of curricula in every school from K to university must begin to happen deliberately. You cannot keep giving your children poison and wonder why they're dead at the end of the day. The antidote to the European academic poison is to replace it with the truth of our history and the reality of our ancestry. There's no other pathway forward.
Good.
May the gods of the land be with you.
Also with you all.
They bless you. May they cause the rain to fall. May your plants be productive. May the sun be gentle on your crops. May your children live long to see your gray hair. And may the wind blow gently upon your houses. And may they visit you in the midst of your dreams. Let visions and dreams be abundant. Let there be an awakening amongst the African people. May we raise our hands and connect one with another. And we look at you and we see ourselves, knowing that the future we are waiting for. I am the future you're waiting for. You are the future I am waiting for. The destiny of tomorrow is on our shoulders. Let's live, let's uplift, let's recognize, let's earth, let's connect, let's work, let's find each other and build this continent to what we want it to be. It starts off with me, in my house, in my expenses, in my thinking. Let that grace, let the wind of this great motherland, as we drink our waters, let's all remember we are connected by this great source of life. As we breathe into each other, we are living together. As we touch the soil, we are connected to the history which now lives in us in the flesh. Therefore, we are all spiritual beings who are having a physical experience. Find that spirit, live that truth, find it, and you will find a better tomorrow for yourselves and your children. Let that peace rest upon the children of the land. I thank you.
Ashe. There can be no way to close it. We thank you so much, our kings, our teachers. Thank you so much. It has been a wonderful pleasure. We are all blessed here tonight, and we can see the spirit is there, just like Professor James Small. When they are there, you understand it. The message is clear. The watcher is here. The speaker is here. Every one of us, we have tapped into that source. So I am much more honored, and I thank all of us for making it tonight. So way forward, we would communicate it Sunday special. How do we take it from here? As we have seen, during the week, places are opening, people are going back into daily chores and stuff. So we'll have to be making these special Sundays and special voices on strategic way forward like this. So I want to thank all of you, and we see ourselves very soon again. One last word. I mean, you already concluded, Professor James Small.
It's very simple. Malcolm X taught us the secret to life is to have no fear. And people say, oh, but the things that makes you frightened. Yes, but fear is your friend. That's your brother and your sister. It should be your barometer to caution. It tells you about possibilities that may not be there. So I know what we're saying to many of our Christian and Muslim brothers and sisters cause fear when they think of moving away from that center. But remember, all the fear is trying to tell you is to be cautious, be aware. Don't let it become, when you let it become a paralysis, then you do nothing and you die. When you see it as a barometer to caution, then your mind is prepared for what comes next. So we are not only the African, we are the embodiment of the universe itself. We are the embodiment of nature itself. We know how much water makes up our body. We know how many minerals are in our body that comes from the earth. We know the primary 4 minerals that dominates our bodies. We know that because our ancestors taught us how to heal ourselves with the knowledge of that thing. So when we understand that we are the earth, we are the cosmos, we are the universe, we are the divine, as my teacher and my king have said, having this human experience in our own peculiar space, with our own mission. Each of us have a mission. Some are not aware of their mission, and some are aware of their mission. If you're aware of your mission, fulfill it. If you're not aware of your mission, turn to your past to find it, and then fulfill it. And we will know when I come back as my grandchild or my great-grandchild or my great-great-grandchild, I would want to smile at the work that I've seen done in the time that I'm away from this body. So to be Africa and African is to be.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So
Thank you.
good night to all of you.
Good night,
And
my
it's been a
dear
pleasure.
Susan.
Maponga, we're going to
Good night, my king, and I'm honored. So we must talk soon. And
Yes.
so I will make time, and I'll come to you probably in the spring or winter.
King Maponga.
We belong to one another. I belong to you. You belong to me.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Good night to all of us. Thank you, King Maponga. We keep in touch for the book launch officially here. Yes. Good night. Bye-bye. Good night. I think Joshua is freezing. Yes. All right. So thank you. I mean, thanks for all those have liked, have commented, have subscribed, and are sharing this video. We've just spent a quality time of 2 hours, but it's a whole Kemetic history of who we are. So if you liked it, please smash that button and share this video extensively. Under the week, we're going to be dividing the videos upon the topics that we talked about: spirituality, for easy transportation or sharing in your various communities, in your families, as a study material. So thank you so very much. Tomorrow we are not live. We're live again on Tuesday with our brother Dennis Boatwright and his concept of what Pan-Africanism should be. But of course, the initial topic is, what lessons could we have learned from a huge movement like the Black Lives Matters if we had actually utilized that force that we came together during the challenge of the deaths that were happening, and we saw the community and the whole world rise up together? What just happened again that we went back to that? How could we have managed that substance to pave a way for us as African people forward? So we welcome our brother. He's called AKA Mhotep, so you already can understand. And he's also the founder of the Pan-African School or Institute, which he does online, offering Swahili courses and also bringing voices around his community in Detroit, in America, together. So it's a pleasure to have this young, smart brother lecture us and give us his experiences on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we're going to be talking about the Pan-African Parliament in South Africa, what actually transpired. As we say, we're going to look at the legal perspective of actually what should have happened, or even just educate ourselves about this institution, just like we're doing today. So yes, during the week, we'll be coming up with the upcoming programs. Sunday special, we're going to get 2 special guests again, like today. And so we keep in touch until we see ourselves again on Tuesday. Thank you so very much. And all blessings to us all. Good night. Bye-bye.
You are watching the Pan-African Daily TV with Dr. Susan Tata. The Africa we want: unity, consciousness, our culture, our spirituality, our history. One Africa for Africans worldwide. Motherland's calling its diaspora home. Join my voice. Join my team. Join my campaign. Campaign 21 # 1 million subscribers on the Pan-African Daily TV YouTube. Be a volunteer. Apply now. Be the new Africa.